Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American... sorry, this thing gets away from me sometimes. Into American origins and evolving institutions. The executive director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a Monday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Monday. It is the 16th day of October in the year 2017. We are live, and I want to welcome you all to a new week of programming here at the Virtual Center. I want to thank Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at Head On for keeping this program on the air. And I want to thank all of you for your continued support of the network and of the efforts of Bob and Agnes and the others at Head On to keep programming like this on the air. If you would like to get on the air and share your thoughts with us, you can do that by contacting Bob Kincaid through Skype. Just type in Bob Kincaid at Skype and the Horn, Bob Kincaid, the Horn at Skype. And I believe you can get on the air.
Bob Kincaid Horn, BOBKINCAID-HORN. There's no the.
Oh, that's all they have. That's all they have to do then.
Yeah, on Skype, Bob Kincaid Horn.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. So if you'd like to get on the air, you can do that. Bob Kincaid Horn, and that will get you into the studio, and then Bob can get you on the air with us live. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me in an email and send them to me, I'd be very, very honored to try to represent you as best I can and get your thoughts, your ideas on the air so our other listeners can benefit from them. That's really the whole idea, of course. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. That's WAObrien, OBRIEN 906, lowercase, all one word, at gmail.com. Excuse me. And I do invite you to visit our Facebook page occasionally. We do have a Virtual Center Facebook page. If you go to Facebook, you know how easy it is. You just type in facebook.com. On your computer, and you will be into the home page. And at the top of that page, there's a search box. And if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you'll be onto our Facebook page. And there are a number of postings there that I've put on in recent days. And I continue to do that. Links to articles and various other things. In fact, I want to devote time, maybe tomorrow's program, to a few of the postings I put on there most recently. One of them deals, obviously, with the president, as many of them do. I think in that sense we're falling into the same situation that much of the media is, in the fact that he's dominating conversation everywhere, including here. But I cited specifically an article by Rand Paul, and I made reference to the fact that I never thought I would be quoting anything from Rand Paul as a lead into a Facebook posting, but indeed I did on this one. So I direct you to our Facebook page, and you can take a look at it. I'd like to perhaps address it tomorrow. What I'd like to do today, and all of this, of course, is pending. I'm assuming that we'll head in this direction. But if you call Bob Kincaid Horn on Skype, you will just type that in on Skype. You'll be into the studio, and Bob can get you on the air with us. And if you have a comment or a question, by all means, you become the priority of today's program. I want you to recognize that and know that. But if at this point we don't have that, so I wanted to head in the direction of education. And I wanted to share it with you, something that happened or occurred here at the end of last week in West Virginia. The West Virginia Department of Education, as we we talked months and months ago when we were on this issue of the Common Core. West Virginia is one of the states that abandoned the Common Core and set out to come up with an alternative set of standards to the Common Core. And part of that, of course, is the testing of students. And the standardized tests that were being used in West Virginia up until this past week was called the Smarter Balance Achievement or Assessment, I think it's called, Smarter Balance Assessment. And that particular assessment is consistent or lines up pretty well with the Common Core standards. So obviously part of dropping or abandoning the Common Core is to abandon the test that's aligned to those standards. And this past weekend, according to an editorial that was in the Charleston Gazette, I believe the end of last week, could have been Thursday or Friday, I believe, the State Board of Education has replaced the Smarter Balanced Assessment with a new assessment that really doesn't deal at all with the Common Core. So that pretty much closes the book on the Common Core in West Virginia. I couldn't resist, in reading this editorial, I couldn't resist commenting on it on Facebook. And unfortunately I did, but I didn't keep a copy of what I wrote. So I'm going to have to kind of paraphrase a little bit of what I wrote. But according to the spokesperson for the Department of Education, who really was explaining this change in testing of 3rd through 8th graders here in West Virginia, the benefits of the new assessment, and I can remember the acronym, it's called AIR, and I can't remember the name of the company. It's something instructional research, I believe. I don't know what the American Instructional Research or something like that is the company that developed this test. And apparently there were 4 different standardized tests competing for the state of West Virginia's business. 2 of them, one was affiliated with the with ACT, American College Testing. That was rejected, according to the spokesman for the Department of Education, because the test they felt was too close to the college boards. Understandably, West Virginia is an ACT state for college entry, and so high school graduates in West Virginia take the ACT test. In many other states, of course, they take the SAT, this SAT test put out by the College Board. Both of those organizations had standardized tests that were in competition for adoption, and both of them were rejected by the State Department of Education in preference to the one that was selected, the acronym for which is AIR. And the only thing I remember is the last word with the R is research. So whatever the company is or the organization, it's something instructional research, I believe, is the company. But anyway, the cost of administering the test is something in excess of $5 million a year. So this is big business. But one of the advantages, the state has bought into this test for at least a 3-year period. The initial contract is for the administration of this test for 3 years to West Virginia 3rd graders through 8th graders. One of the features of this test is that it is a test that students take on a computer. It's not the old paper-driven test that most students are used to. This one is administered on computers. And that is seen as one of the advantages of this test. The problem in West Virginia, of course, is that so few students proportionally own computers. Large sections of the state do not have broadband access in the more rural parts of West Virginia. So consequently, students are quite deficient in their comfort level with computers. And that bothered me a little bit because that could work against students who are going to be taking a test on a computer, and the chances are they're not going to be that comfortable using the computer. That's the first thing. That's liable to affect student performance. The other thing that was a really attraction for the state to this new test was the fact that beginning in the second year, West Virginia teachers would be permitted to submit questions on the test. The first year, of course, the test is going to be comprised of questions that are already there, questions that are in the can, so to speak. But beginning in year 2, West Virginia teachers will be able to streamline the test so that the test more closely resembles or is symmetrical with West Virginia's standards. In other words, the test will actually test what West Virginia's teachers are teaching. And the first thing that occurred to me, of course, is that if West Virginia teachers are able to submit questions that are on the standardized test, then that's, given the fact that the goal here is to raise the test scores of students, that's one way to do it. Being facetious, of course. The thing that bothered me most about this transition and the abandoning of the Common Core was the ability to measure the performance of West Virginia's schools with schools in other states. The assessment, the standardized tests that students have been taking, the Smarter Balance Assessment, was susceptible to comparison among different states. And that made it possible for West Virginia educators to see how our students are measuring up to other students. I always thought that this was an advantage of the Common Core, because the whole idea of the Common Core was to raise performance, student performance, all the way up and down the line. And one way to do that is to hold students to a fixed set of standards, a set of fixed measures, so that West Virginia teachers, West Virginia educators, will be able to tell exactly how their teaching is stacking up to other states, how their students are performing relative to other students in other states. According to the spokesperson for the State Department of Education, the advantage of this test is that the results can't be held up against or compared with other states. This really bothers me, because obviously it would seem to me that if West Virginia every year was forced to measure student success on these tests as opposed to students in other states, then by definition, the pressure would be on to increase performance. Plus the fact that we would be able to see deficiencies, we would be able to know which areas and which grades were in need of special attention. In other words, all the kinds of considerations that would go into improving student performance and improving the value and the benefits of the testing are gone once you lose the opportunity to compare. And the State Department of Education for the last couple of years, as the push was on to get rid of the Common Core standards, The argument was that the standards that West Virginia students are measured against need to be standards that are consistent with West Virginia's unique culture. Well, if I sound facetious here, it's because I'm intentionally being that way. When you combine these two things, the fact that the test is not susceptible to being compared with performances in other states, and when you add to that the idea of West Virginia setting a set of standards, adopting a set of standards that are consistent with West Virginia's unique culture, then ultimately what it seems to me you're doing is intentionally educating West Virginia children to not be competitive with students in other states. It would seem to me that we would welcome that kind of comparison, those kinds of measures, that kind of pressure to improve performance. It would seem to me that we would welcome it rather than be frightened by it. So in the posting that I put on Facebook the other day, I couldn't resist saying that since this new test is not susceptible to comparison with performances in other states, then ultimately what that means is that when West Virginia develops its own standards that are totally consistent with West Virginia's unique culture, it's pretty obvious that other states are not going to be banging on the door trying to find out what those standards are so that they can copy them. The implication here is that we're doing for our West Virginia students something that is uniquely beneficial to them. I'm afraid that what we're doing is rendering our students even less competitive to students in other states than they were before. So long as performance results could be measured one state against the other, then it was much easier, much more efficient to effectively assess where we were strong, where we were weak in terms of disciplines, in terms of grade levels, etc. Now, we've taken away the opportunity to do any of that. And it seems to me, despite the implication in the editorial and the comments coming out of the State Department of Education, I had to say in my Facebook posting that I'm betting that other states aren't banging on the door trying to find out what West Virginia's standards are so that they could copy them. In fact, that's what we ought to be doing. I've mentioned before, more than once, the fact that if you compare West Virginia's public education system up and down the line with that in other states, and I know in our case with our own family, we have 3 grandchildren in Connecticut's public schools, and they're youngsters. The oldest one of 3, there are 3 of them, and the oldest one is 11. They're 11, 9, and I believe 7 are the ages of these 3 children. They live on their phones. They live on computers. They are so literate technology-wise compared to our students, many of whom don't have broadband, many of whom don't own a computer at all. The only computer they have access to is the one they have in school. And so to try to improve or uplift the skills of West Virginians in terms of employment skills or academic skills, and increasingly those are becoming very, very similar. We've talked about that before. It seems to me that an absolute necessity here in West Virginia is broadband access to everybody. That's the only way that our students can really compete effectively with students from other states. We don't have it. We do not have it here in West Virginia. The more I wrestled with this editorial at the end of the week, and the more I worried about it, because I'm very, very defensive of West Virginia's educational challenges, I kept thinking pretty much throughout much of the weekend about these issues and about education. And it just so happens that an assignment that I gave my college class, which was due, which was to be turned in last Wednesday, was on a document on education which was written in the late 18th century by Benjamin Rush. We have looked at this document before, some time ago, here in the Virtual Center. But as I recall, the document we looked at was principally excerpts from the original. What I gave my group of college students was the entire document, and I asked them to do an analysis of it. And they turned it in this past Wednesday, and I've spent time this weekend reading those essays. And this is the way I grade essay exams. I guess it's just unique with me. But I really feel that it's absolutely essential to read every paper twice. So what I usually do before I correct papers is that I read through all the papers first, just to get a feel for how students are handling the assignment. And what this enables me to do is identify in a very, very general, superficial way the strong papers from the not so strong papers. I mean, you can tell just by reading the document without putting one word or making one mark on a paper. You can pretty well tell just by reading it through whether it's strong or whether it's on target, whether it's getting the idea or not. So I did that this weekend. I read through all the essays that I have. And then yesterday I started to actually grade them. And I didn't finish. I'm going to finish this evening and tomorrow, and hopefully return the papers on Wednesday. But the document deals with, the document in question is a document written by Dr. Benjamin Rush. He's a physician based in Philadelphia. The document was written in the late 1780s, prior to the Constitution of the United States. 1786 is the date that Benjamin Rush wrote this document. Consequently, since the Constitutional Convention doesn't meet until 1787, the next year, Rush's document does not deal with education in the entire nation, but rather education in the state of Pennsylvania alone. Just as, and it's important to keep in mind, we have dealt in the past with Thomas Jefferson's education document, the so-called General Diffusion of Knowledge document, which Thomas Jefferson included in his Notes on the State of Virginia, published in 1782. Like Rush's document, 4 years later, Jefferson's document is unique to Virginia because we do not, at that point, when he writes this, we're still in the middle of the War for Independence. So we're not talking about a national republic here, not yet. Benjamin Rush is writing 1786, when the nation is living under the Articles of Confederation. The Constitutional Convention does not meet until May of 1787. Consequently, when Benjamin Rush is talking in this document about children, about the educational system in the country, he's talking about Pennsylvania. What makes Rush's document unique and valuable, it seems to me, there are a number of things about it that are valuable. One of them is the fact that because Rush writes specific to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, of the 13 original colonies, is the most diverse, the most pluralistic of the colonies. If you look at the way the 13 colonies are populated, Pennsylvania offers land ownership as an inducement to settlement. William Penn, going all the way back in our colonial history, I'm sure you remember that name. William Penn was the proprietor for the colony of Pennsylvania. He was given the proprietorship and named by the king proprietor for the colony of Pennsylvania. That meant that as proprietor, William Penn was supreme. The whole idea of his colony was to produce wealth. William Penn believed that in order to be successful, his colony had to attract people. He had to find a way to recruit settlers, to encourage settlement. And the way to do it was to offer land ownership. Offer the availability of land for those willing to come and take up residence in Pennsylvania. The result is, unlike most of the other colonies, those who come to Pennsylvania come from everywhere, from throughout Europe. There are large Dutch contingents in Pennsylvania. There are large German groups, Mennonites, very popular. And the result is that Pennsylvania is unique among the colonies in that Pennsylvania is settled by a very diverse, a very pluralistic population. That means that governing Pennsylvania is unique because there are so many different nationalities, so many different religions represented in Pennsylvania. So one of the inducements, one of the incentives that William Penn initially adopts is the idea of religious freedom. He's a Quaker, of course. He's a religious dissenter. And so he believes that opening up his colony to religious dissenters by offering religious freedom will bring the large numbers of settlers he believes the colony must have in order to flourish. So the result is the combination of land ownership plus the incentive of religious freedom makes Pennsylvania one of the most successful colonies right from the very beginning. It experiences tremendously rapid population growth. And the reality is, because of religious freedom, different religious groups settle there. And that means that governing Pennsylvania as a colony is quite unique, because you've got to govern in ways that encourage people to be able to live together and respect each other's freedom, religious freedom, and the rest. What makes Pennsylvania so valuable in colonial history is that more than any other colony, Pennsylvania reflects the entire nation to come. One of the things that's going to characterize the population of the United States is its diversity. Consequently, the government of the United States is going to have to deal with maintaining law and order in a nation that is diverse that is comprised of large numbers of different ethnic groups, different religious groups, etc. So Pennsylvania becomes a model, if you will, for the entire nation. Consequently, Benjamin Rush's proposal for education in the state of Pennsylvania, and of course in 1786 under the Articles of Confederation, independence has been won. So indeed, Pennsylvania is now a state, no longer a colony. Benjamin Rush puts together his thoughts, his ideas on education, especially education in a diverse, pluralistic place like Pennsylvania. The title of Benjamin Rush's piece, Thoughts Upon the Mode of Education Proper in a Republic. And an awful lot of what Benjamin Rush proposes for Pennsylvania is going to prove applicable to the nation at large later on. That, it seems to me, is why Benjamin Rush's particular contribution it's one of the reasons it's so valuable. In the very first paragraph, Benjamin Rush sketches out his plan or his thesis. He says, and I'm reading him directly, the business of education has acquired a new complexion by the independence of our country. The form of government we have assumed has created a new class of duties to every American. It becomes us, therefore, to examine our former habits upon this subject, and in laying the foundations for nurseries of wise and good men, to adapt our modes of teaching to the peculiar form of our government. That paragraph, 4 lines, is really loaded. Notice that Benjamin Rush refers to schools as nurseries of wise and good men. It seems to me that it's worth time to reflect a little bit on the idea of a nursery. What happens in nurseries? Obviously, nurseries can be places where babies are kept. But nurseries can also involve plants. And if you think of a nursery in agriculture, you're talking about a kind of situation where plants are raised, where they have a controlled access to moisture, controlled access to sunlight. The assumption being that if you provide the proper environment, the plants will flourish. It seems to me in Rush's mind, he sees schools somewhat the same way. Basically, what he's talking about by comparing schools as foundations for nurseries of wise and good men, he's pretty much defining the principal role that he sees schools playing. Their purpose is to prepare youngsters for citizenship in a republic. Even though Rush's entire document is on education, his focus or his priority is on education as a means to some greater end. Education is not the end or the purpose of education. The purpose of education is what it leads to, what it produces in terms of good citizens, wise and good men. Rush closes that paragraph by talking about the degree to which our modes of teaching must be adjusted to the peculiar form of our government. The nature of republicanism itself needs to define the way we teach our young people, the mode of education, the methodology. The purpose of public education is to educate good students, to turn out wise and good men. It is not to educate individual students to the maximum of their potential, the maximum of their innate abilities. And that's one of the things I'm noticing as I read the essays that students have turned in on this document. They assume, for the most part, many of them do, that the purpose of education is to educate them, educate students. In Rush's mind, the purpose of education is to turn out good citizens in a republic, for a republic. Education becomes the means to that end. Education is not its own goal. And that's the way that Benjamin Rush opens his document, opens his essay. The independence of our country, the creation of a republic, dictates the need for public education, but it also dictates the kind of education that students must receive in order to function appropriately in a republic. Rush goes on. The first remark that I shall make upon this subject is that an education in our own is to be preferred to an education in a foreign country. In this period, in the late 18th century, those that could afford it, children of the wealthy, were oftentimes being educated in Europe. They were going to some of the finest universities in Europe, many of them in the British Empire. Cambridge, Oxford, the University of Glasgow in Scotland, etc. Rush's argument is, if we're going to educate our young people to live in a republic, then the first requirement is that an education in our own is to be preferred to an education in a foreign country. And then he includes this sentence, which everybody reacts to. The principle of patriotism stands in need of the reinforcement of prejudice. Let me read that again. The principle of patriotism stands in need of the reinforcement of prejudice. If you combine that with the sentence just before it, namely that an education in our own country is preferable to an education in the foreign country, and then you follow that up with the idea that patriotism requires prejudice, then what Benjamin Rush is effectively saying is that the purpose of our schools is to prejudice our young people in favor of this country. not only do they become good citizens in this country, they become so enmeshed in this country that they're prejudiced in favor of it. That's what patriotism is about. And in Russia's mind, that's what education is about. The principle of patriotism stands in need of the reinforcement of prejudice. And then he goes on and clarifies that. And it is well known, he says, that our strongest prejudices in favor of our country are formed in the first 1 and 20 years of our lives. In order to create patriots, you have got to get hold of children when they are young. That's when prejudices are most successfully formed. And then he gives an example from ancient history. The policy of the Lacedaemonians, he says, is well worthy of our imitation. When Antipater demanded 50 of their children as hostages for the fulfillment of a distant engagement, those wise republicans refused to comply with his demand, but readily offered him double the number of their adult citizens, whose habits and prejudices could not be shaken by residing in a foreign country. That's his example. Your children are the most valuable because they are the most malleable. They are the most easily prejudiced in favor of their country. That means that using this example from ancient history, you persuade a foreign power to take 100 of your adults rather than 50 of your children. Because chances are your adults already have their prejudices formed. They can't be easily influenced by living in a foreign country. Rush continues. Passing by in this place the advantages to the community from the early attachment of youth to the laws and constitution of their country, I shall only remark that young men who have trodden the paths of science together, or have joined in the same sports, whether of swimming, skating, fishing, or hunting, generally feel through life such ties to each other as add greatly to the obligations of mutual benevolence. If you want people to get along as adults, you've got to put them together as children so that they are used to getting along with people of their own nationality, of their own nation. And there's no better way, he says, to get people to be able to adopt the ideas of mutual benevolence, respect for others, than by educating them together in classrooms, in sporting events, etc. He says, I conceive the education of our youth in this country to be peculiarly necessary in Pennsylvania, while our citizens are composed of the natives of so many different kingdoms of Europe. Our schools of learning, by producing one general and uniform system of education, will render the mass of the people more homogeneous and thereby fit them more easily for uniform and peaceable government. I want to read that sentence again. That paragraph, there's 2 sentences. I conceive the education of our youth in this country to be peculiarly necessary in Pennsylvania, while our citizens are composed of the natives of so many different kingdoms in Europe. Our schools of learning, by producing one general uniform system of education, will render the mass of the people more homogeneous and thereby fit them more easily for uniform and peaceable government. What we have here in Benjamin Rush is a classic explanation and advocacy for integration. If you want the races to get along, you've got to integrate the schools. You've got to get youngsters of different races used to each other when they're young, before their prejudices, racial prejudices, are developed. Rush is using the same model, emphasizing the diversity of Pennsylvania's settlement. Because Pennsylvania is settled by people from so many different kingdoms of Europe, by creating one uniform system of public education, thereby you render the mass of the people more homogeneous. You get people able to live together and get along, and thereby you fit them more easily for uniform and peaceable government. You are turning out people who are more easily governed by integrating them and using the schools to do this. That's Rush's message at the beginning of this document. I think you can begin to see how rich this document is in what it tells us, and the challenges that he believes our schools can solve. Then he goes on and becomes more specific about education itself. He said, I proceed in the next place to inquire what mode of education we shall adopt, so as to secure to the state all the advantages that are to be derived from the proper instruction of youth. Notice, the benefits of education are not to be the students. The benefit of education is to be the state, is to be the system of government. The purpose of the schools is to serve as nurseries of wise and good men. It's educating citizens on what being a citizen in this republic is about. And Rush goes on and becomes more specific. Here, he says, I beg leave to remark that the only foundation for a useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue. Without virtue, there can be no liberty. And liberty is the object and life of all republican governments. Religion must be at the heart of the curriculum, Rush is saying. Religion is the basis of virtue. Virtue is the basic foundation for liberty, and individual liberty is the key to republicanism. Individual freedom is the key. In order to be able to support freedom for your citizens, you've got to have virtue. Citizens have to be able to use freedom wisely and well. They have to be schooled, educated in how to exercise their liberty. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. The rules of behavior, acceptable behavior, not acceptable behavior. The place to teach that is in school. And how well we do it in our schools is ultimately going to determine the success of our political system, the success of our nation. Then Rush goes on. Such is my veneration for every religion that reveals the attributes of the deity or a future state of rewards and punishments, that I had rather see the opinions of Confucius or Muhammad inculcated upon our youth than see them grow up wholly devoid of a system of religious principles. But the religion I mean to recommend in this place is that of the New Testament. This is critically important. Rush's goal here is not religious conversion. He's not in the business of creating Christians. He's in the business of creating good citizens for a republic. But he also believes that the best way to do this is to build your public school curriculum around religion. And he's going to tell us why. But he said, I'm not pushing one religion over the other. As long as a religion teaches the attributes of the deity, in other words, as long as a particular religion teaches that there is a heaven and a hell, there's a place you go if you're good as a reward, and there's a place you go if you're bad, which is hell. As long as the religion teaches that, or believes that, then it's acceptable to me. Because his goal is the moral training of kids. It's not educating their minds. It's prejudicing them in favor of their own country, in favor of their own fellow citizens. He says, I would rather they be taught the ideas of Muhammad or Confucius than grow up without a system of religious principles. But then he says, the religion that I opt to choose and emphasize here is the religion of the New Testament, Christianity. And he's going to tell us why. It is foreign to my purpose to hint at the arguments which establish the truth of the Christian revelation. I'm not into the truth of Scripture. I'm not into the elements of the Bible. My only business is to declare, he says, that all of its doctrines and all of its precepts are calculated to promote the happiness of society and the safety and well-being of civil government. And this next section is absolutely delicious. Rush says, quote, a Christian cannot fail of being a Republican. The history of the creation of man and of the relation our species to each other by birth, which is recorded in the Old Testament, is the best refutation that can be given to the divine right of kings, and the strongest argument that can be used in favor of the original and natural equality of all mankind. The reason Christianity is the best religion at accomplishing what I'm about in this plan of education is that a Christian can't fail of being a Republican, because the history of the creation of man that Christianity teaches and the story of the Old Testament is the best proof that exists against the idea of a divine right of kings, and the strongest argument we can find in favor of the original and natural equality of all mankind. If your political system is going to emphasize the equality of everybody before the law, then Christianity is the best religion you can find to accomplish that. Again, he's not teaching religion. He's using religion to accomplish his political goals, which is to turn out good citizens. So he opens that by saying a Christian cannot fail of being a Republican because of the creation of man. Then he goes on and says the same thing again. A Christian, I say again, cannot fail of being a Republican. For every precept of the gospel inculcates those degrees of humility, self-denial, and brotherly kindness which are directly opposed to the pride of monarchy and the pageantry of a court. If you're going to build in your young people respect for Republican government, respect for the freedom and equality of your fellow man, then you can't beat Christianity to do it. Because Christianity teaches humility, self-denial, brotherly kindness. A Christian cannot fail of being useful to the republic, Rush says, for his religion teacheth him that no man liveth to himself. And lastly, a Christian cannot fail of being wholly inoffensive, for his religion teaches him in all things to do others what he would wish in like circumstances they should do to him. Because Christianity is based on the principles of love your neighbor as thyself, treat others as you would want to be treated, be humble, practice self-denial, be kind to your fellow man. Those are the essence of Christian teaching, he says. They are also the essentials of Republican government. So if we're going to teach our young people to be good citizens in a republic, then we want to use religion to do it. And the best one we can find is Christianity. Christians are easily governed. They are easily persuaded. It's the perfect religion for the purposes for which our public school system needs to exist. He says, I am aware. Actually, we're right at the top of the hour. I think maybe this is a good place to take a break before we get into another set of ideas here. It's just we've reached the top of the hour. We have one more hour to go. You are listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Monday. It is the 16th day of October in the year 2017. I do invite you to stay with us for our second hour. We're going to pause and take a 5-minute break, and I know Bob has queued up some music for us for our enjoyment during this 5-minute break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you. This is a second hour of today's Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. This is Bill O'Brien. We are live. Today is the 16th day of October in the year 2017. It is a pleasure to be with you. For those of you who've been with us through the first hour, I want to thank you for staying with us for this, our second hour. If you are just joining us, our topic today is education. More specifically, We are looking at Benjamin Rush's document from 1786 on the mode of education proper in a republic. And what Benjamin Rush is laying out for us in this document is a game plan for a system of public education. In 1786, he's tailoring it specifically to Pennsylvania, but he realizes that the entire nation exists as a nation under the Articles of Confederation, although, as we know, the very next year the Constitutional Convention is going to meet and replace these articles with the Constitution of the United States. But that doesn't make Benjamin Rush's proposals any less relevant. In fact, I would suggest too it makes them even more relevant. Before we continue with this subject, I'd like to share with you some of the details for ways that you can communicate with us or touch base with us and share your thoughts. If you would like to get on the air, then call Bob Kincaid Horn, H-O-R-N, on Skype. Use Skype. Type in Bob Kincaid Horn. That'll get you into the studios. And Bob or Agnes, one or the other, can get you on the air. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me in an email, I'd be glad to get your ideas on the air for you. My email address is waobrien906 at gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906 at gmail.com. And again, I call your attention to our Facebook page. In the search box at the top of the homepage on Facebook, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. As I mentioned a moment ago, the subject for today is Benjamin Rush's mode of education proper in a republic. For those of you who've been with us through the first hour, you probably are seeing clear similarities between what about education and what Jefferson said earlier about education as well for the masses. Jefferson's whole idea for universal mandatory education for the first 3 years of public schooling was order and morality. Teach children what to believe, how to believe, what's true, what's not true, etc. This is exactly what Benjamin Rush has given us in this document in a lot more detail. His basic argument, as review, where we've been so far, is that in order to effectively guarantee that we will have citizens able to function properly in a republic, it is absolutely essential to get to these youngsters when they are indeed youngsters. Benjamin Rush says, if you'll recall at the beginning of the document, the strongest prejudices in favor of one's country are formed in the first 21 years of life. Once they become adults, it's too late. You've got to deal, you've got to live with what is. But if you can get young people when they're young, you can literally shape their values and their morals. If you believe that Republican government requires virtue among its citizens, then the only way to address that is through a system of education. Public schools. The purpose of education, Rush is saying throughout, is not for the benefit of the student. It's for the benefit of the state. He's going to emphasize that even more as we go on. The issue that we've been dealing with is the role that Rush believes religion must play in the education of our youth. Rush says that any religion that teaches that there is a God, and that teaches of a system of rewards and punishments, a heaven and a hell, will work in terms of what Rush has in mind. But what he says is, in a republic, there's absolutely no question that the best religion to accomplish these goals is Christianity. Because Christianity teaches humility, it teaches self-denial, it's built on the principles of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It emphasizes kindness to your fellow man. All the things that a republic must have, Christianity teaches as religious priorities. Again, Rush says, my purpose is not to turn out good Christians, it's to turn out good Republicans. Small r, not big R, obviously. Rush says, after he explains why a Christian cannot fail of being a Republican, he says, I'm aware that I dissent from one of those paradoxical opinions with which modern times abound, and that it is improper to fill the minds of youth with religious prejudices of any kind, and that they should be left to choose their own principles after they've arrived at an age in which they're capable of judging for themselves. What Rush is saying is, I am aware that some people are going to take issue with me because I'm pushing religious principles on kids. And in this country, Rush is saying, we have this principle, this idea, that it's not right to fill the minds of young people with religious prejudices of any kind. Rather, that young people should be left to choose their own religious principles. They need to find their own religion. And that it is a violation of all we stand for, Rush says, to impose religious principles or prejudices ahead of time. Now Rush explains why he's doing that. He said, could we preserve the mind in childhood and youth a perfect blank? In other words, if we could guarantee that our young people would not fill their minds with anything, that their minds would stay blank, this plan of education would have more to recommend it. If we could be sure that young people aren't prejudiced by somebody else ahead of time. He said the human mind runs as naturally into principles as it does after facts. It submits with difficulty to those restraints or partial discoveries which are imposed upon it in the infancy of reason. Hence the impatience of children to be informed upon all subjects that relate to the invisible world. Kids want to know. Kids are thirsty to know things, to get answers to questions. Therefore, we can't risk not teaching them the right things, because it's just as likely that they're going to be exposed to the wrong things. He said, I beg leave to ask, why should we pursue a different plan of education with respect to religion from the one we pursue in teaching the arts and sciences? Do we leave our youth to acquire systems of geography, philosophy, or politics till they've arrived at an age in which they're capable of judging for themselves? We do not. I claim no more than for religion than for the other sciences. And I add further, if our youth are disposed after they're of age to think for themselves, a knowledge of one system will be the best means of conducting them in free inquiry into other systems of religion, just as an acquaintance with one particular system of philosophy is the best introduction to the study of all other systems in the world. In the margin of my document, I've written, do you agree with this? Do I agree with this? Rush has been talking throughout this entire document about creating prejudice in the minds of children, prejudicing them in favor of their country, in favor of their countrymen over others. If you do that and you raise children that way, then can you legitimately expect that when people reach a certain age, they're going to start investigating other religions? Chances are they're going to stay with the one that they learned from at the very beginning. I would argue that Rush is contradicting himself here. On the one hand, he's talking about prejudicing young people. Now he's talking about the fact that when they reach a certain age, they'll start to inquire for themselves into other systems of religion. They never will. By definition, children who are introduced and indoctrinated into Christianity as children remain there. So I think Rush is talking out of the both sides of his mouth here in this particular situation. Next to the duty which young men owe to their Creator, Rush says, I wish to see a regard to their country inculcated upon them. Children are not going to be educated so that they themselves can learn to appreciate their own country. They're going to be inculcated with regard for their own country. When the Duke of Sully, he says, became Prime Minister to Henry IV of France, the first thing he did, he tells us, was to subdue and forget his own heart, unquote. The same duty is incumbent upon every citizen of a republic. Our country includes family, friends, and property, and should be preferred to them all. Let our pupil be taught that he does not belong to himself, but that he is public property. Let him be taught to love his family, but let him be taught at the same time that he must forsake, even forget them, when the welfare of his country requires it. He must watch for the state as if its liberties depended upon his vigilance alone. We are creating prejudiced patriots for this country and for the people of this country. Pure and simple. That's what schools are about. That's what they're supposed to do. I would suggest, this is parenthetically now, I'm not in rush here. I would say that from the very beginning, if you look at this and you look at Thomas Jefferson's document, it's very obvious from the very beginning that the founders who spent time thinking about public education at all saw public education principally from the perspective of indoctrination. Not education, not critical thinking, not skills building, none of that. Patriotism is the goal. And what Rush is saying is each child must be taught that the liberties of all the people depend on your vigilance alone. But he must do this in such a manner as not to defraud his creditors or neglect his family. He must love private life, but he must decline no station, however public or responsible it may be, when called to it by the suffrages of his fellow citizens. He must love popularity, but he must despise it when set in competition with the dictates of his judgment or the real interests of his country. He must love character and have a due sense of injuries, but he must be taught to appeal only to the laws of the state, to defend the one and punish the other. He must love family honor, but he must be taught that neither the rank nor the antiquity of his ancestors can command respect without personal merit. He must avoid neutrality in all questions that divide the state, but he must shun the rage and the acrimony of party spirit. He must be a patriot. His country is always right, Rush says. I do not wish to see our youth educated with a single prejudice against any nation but our country. But we impose a task on human nature repugnant alike to reason, revelation, and the ordinary dimensions of the human heart, when we require him to embrace with equal affection the whole family of mankind. It's very noble to teach young people to respect and love everybody, irrespective of who they are. But that's not consistent with human nature, he said. The fact of the matter is, people are going to be prejudiced for their own people first. That's the way we are. And Rush's position is, there's nothing wrong with that. He must be taught to amass wealth, Rush says, but it must be only to increase his power of contributing to the wants and demands of the state. He must be indulged occasionally in amusements, but he must be taught that study and business should be his principal pursuits in life. Above all, he must love life and endeavor to acquire as many of its conveniences as possible by hard work and economy. But he must be taught that this life is not his own when the safety of his country requires it. Benjamin Rush sees the public education system purely and simply as a system of indoctrination. That's the way he defines education. I have to say, from my studies and observations over the years of our education system, this model is still the model that drives our education system. If indoctrination was to be the intent of our schools, then our schools are successful. The criticisms of our education, the criticisms of our school today, are based on the fact that kids can't read, they can't think critically, they can't solve problems. What I'm pointing out here with Benjamin Rush is that was never the intent of our education system from the beginning. The purpose of our education system was to build patriots. Rush goes on and says, while we inculcate these Republican duties upon our pupil, we must not neglect at the same time to inspire him with Republican principles. He must be taught that there can be no durable liberty except in a republic, and that government, like all other sciences, is of a progressive nature. He must be taught to look favorably upon government. He must be taught that the only people who are free are people who live in republics. I think we can say that we do that fairly well. I conceive it possible to combine power in such a way as not only to increase the happiness, but to promote the duration of Republican forms of government far beyond the terms limited for them by history or the opinions of mankind. To those who have studied human nature, Rush says, it will not appear paradoxical to recommend in this essay a particular attention to music, to vocal music, its mechanical effects in civilizing the mind, and thereby preparing it for the influence of religion and government, have been so often felt and recorded that it will be unnecessary to mention facts in favor of its usefulness in order to excite proper attention to it. What Rush is saying, the benefits of music are that they prepare the mind for religion and government. They relax the mind, and they make you much more susceptible. I cannot help, Rush says, bearing a testimony in this place against the custom which prevails in some parts of America, but which is daily falling into disuse in Europe, of crowding boys together under one roof for the purpose of education. What he's arguing against here are dormitories, are residential schools, schools where kids are sent, they not only go to school, but they live there. This practice, Rush says, is the gloomy remains of monkish ignorance and is as unfavorable to the improvements of the mind in useful learning as monasteries are to the spirit of religion. I grant this mode of secluding boys from the intercourse of private families has a tendency to make them scholars, but our business is to make them men, citizens, and Christians. The purpose of our education is not to turn out scholars. It's to turn youngsters into men, men, citizens, and Christians. The vices of young people are generally learned from each other. The vices of adults seldom infect them. Therefore, you don't allow youngsters to live together on a permanent basis all the time, because the worst rubs off on the others. From the observations that I have made, it is plain, Rush says, that I consider it possible to convert men into Republican machines. That line, I would suggest, says it all. I consider it possible to convert men into Republican machines. This must be done if we expect them to perform their parts properly in the great machine of the government of the state. Having pointed out these general principles, which should be inculcated alike in all schools of the state, I proceed now to make a few remarks upon the method of conducting what is commonly called a liberal or learned education in a republic. This is a point of transition. One of the things that I've noticed in the papers I'm reading is that few students caught this. What Rush is saying is, up until this point, we've been talking about education for everybody. The general principles that should be inculcated alike in all the schools of the state. Now, he said, let's talk about quality education in a republic. So the question is he still talking about education of everybody? No. It is my belief that what Rush is doing here is talking about quality education for the few. And from here on, he goes into curriculum. He goes into specific subjects. But it's very clear that the training, the inculcation, the indoctrination part happens first. Those that are left enter into what he calls liberal or learned education in a republic. He says, I'll begin this part of my subject by bearing a testimony against the common practice of attempting to teach boys the learned languages and the arts and sciences too early in life. The first 12 years of life are barely sufficient to instruct a boy in reading, writing, and arithmetic. With these, he may be taught those modern languages which are necessary for him to speak. The state of memory in early life is favorable to the acquisition of languages, especially when they are conveyed to the mind through the ear. Because youngsters memorize so well, this is the time to teach them foreign languages, not later. This I find exceptionally interesting. Connected with the study of language is the study of eloquence. It is well known how great a part it constituted of the Roman education. It is the first accomplishment in a republic and often sets the whole machine of government in motion. Let our youth, therefore, be instructed in this art. We do not extol it too highly when we attribute as much to the power of eloquence as to the sword in bringing about American revolution. Eloquence, I would suggest to you, is the ability to persuade, is the ability to sell. What he's speaking about here is that a quality education, and this isn't one that everybody's going to get, but for those who do, they need to be taught eloquence. They need to be taught how to persuade. He said, I don't think I'm extolling too much when we attribute to the power of eloquence equal to that of the sword in bringing about American revolution. The ability to persuade is invaluable, and youngsters need to be taught what it is. Again, the question is, are these the same people that are being indoctrinated through the first 12 years of their lives? I don't believe so. Now he talks about the arts and sciences that are taught in our American colleges. I wish to see a regular course of lectures given on history and chronology, the science of government, the history of ancient republics, the progress of liberty and tyranny in different nations of Europe. I likewise wish to see the numerous facts that relate to the origin and present state of commerce, together with the nature and principles of money, reduced to such a system as to be intelligible and agreeable to a young man. I consider emphasis on the economy, on currency, on money, as to be next in value to religion in humanizing mankind. If people become driven by being successful, it causes everybody to move in the same direction. And he says it humanizes mankind. Of course, he's not considering the fact that people become overly greedy and all the rest of it. He talks about let young students understand the general principles of legislation, whether they relate to revenue or to the preservation of life, liberty, or property. Let him be directed frequently to attend courts of justice, where he'll have the best opportunities to acquire habits of comparing and arranging his ideas by observing the discovery of truth and the examination of witnesses, where he'll hear the laws of the state explained, with all the advantages of that species of eloquence which belongs to the bar. He's talking about college education here. He's not talking about the education that he opens his document with. And this is kind of interesting. I beg pardon for having delayed for so long to say anything about the separate and peculiar mode of education proper for women in a republic. I don't know how many people realize that Benjamin Rush later wrote an education document specifically for female education. He said, I'm sensible that they must concur in all our plans of education for young men, or no laws will ever render them effectual. Children are going to learn from their mothers. Therefore, their mothers must be educated in what's proper so that they can teach the children. Again, women have a very special role in Rush's frame of reference here. The opinions and conduct of men are often regulated by the women in the most arduous enterprises of life, and their approbation is frequently the principal reward of the hero's dangers and the patriot's toils. The first impressions on the minds of children are generally derived from women. That's why women, for the most part, teach elementary school. The thinking is that the youngest children need to be exposed to females, need to be exposed to love. I can remember when I was in college getting a degree, a teaching degree in education, one of our instructors made the point that those people who go into elementary education do so because they have a need to be loved. They want the love of little children. There's one paragraph left in Rush's document. But effectively, this is Benjamin Rush's education, mode of education proper in a republic. I think if you look at the entire document, it's very obvious that he sees a system of education primarily as a means to contribute to the support of the state, to the support of Republican government. He sees the values necessary for Republican government to be successful inculcated in children in the earliest years of public education. He does not see the purpose of education as to educate students. He sees the principal purpose of education as one of indoctrinating students. He wants to build prejudice. He wants to build prejudices in favor of our own country, prejudices in favor of our own people, prejudices in favor of our own political system, prejudices in favor of our economic system, free enterprise capitalism. Rush believes that this is a vital way to educate young people in a republic. He believes that religion plays a substantial role in this amongst the youngest kids, because Christianity teaches the principles and values that republics must have. But according to Rush, any religion will do as long as it teaches a system of rewards and punishments, as long as it has a heaven and a hell. The idea being that children are rewarded for good behavior and they're punished for bad behavior. And that's what the purpose of education is to teach that. You are free, but you are free only to do those things which are acceptable. It's the same definition of liberty that John Winthrop used in the 17th century. Liberty is the freedom to do that which is good, just, and honest. You are not free to do anything you want. You are free to do only what is acceptable. In order to be able to handle freedom, you must be taught what's acceptable. You must be shown. You must be indoctrinated. This is the purpose of a public education system in a republic. So therefore, Rush believes and argues that if we're going to raise little Republican machines, we need to make sure that our people are educated here, not in other countries. We want to keep out foreign ideas. We want to keep out dangerous ideas. We do not want our children exposed to ideas which are alien or contrary to what we want them to believe. I really believe that this document really gets to the heart and soul of the essence of our education system. I really believe it. On the other hand, let's be realistic. We are living in a nation right now where the new Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, is hell-bent on destroying our system of public schools. So in other words, she is taking a position that argues that all of this that Rush is talking about is unnecessary. As I read it and I talk about it, I obviously am adopting a tone which is very negative to this. I believe that this is what's wrong with our education system today. I believe that that's what we're doing. This is still what we're doing. We are afraid to educate all of our people. What we do is require our young people to earn the right to be educated. Earn the right to be well educated. The thinking is that everybody must be indoctrinated into behaving and acting in ways which are acceptable. For society's own protection, it must do that. I guess the question that I would like to raise is how much of that is true in today's world? If we eliminated public education entirely, if we just reserved education for the people who could pay for it, the people who could afford it, what would happen to our republic? I guess the question I'm asking all of us to think about seriously, besides reading, writing, and arithmetic, besides history and math and literature and psychology and sociology and geography and government and music and art and all of these other subjects that we study in school. What did we learn in school that doesn't fit into any of those subjects? To what extent do our schools continue to indoctrinate us? How much are we all products of our schooling? The way we make decisions, the way we evaluate fairness, the way we determine what's fair and what's unfair. Our mode of behavior, the one that all of us are taught, comes from our public education, comes from our initial years of school. Is Benjamin Rush correct? In order for a republic to work, do we have to have this? Is public education absolutely a necessity? Or is something like Betsy DeVos is promoting possible, preferable? Should education be reserved only for the people who really want it? For the people willing to pay for it? Or is education so necessary to the safety and security of the rest of us that we're willing to continue to see our tax money used to educate the children of everybody, rich and poor? Doesn't matter. The safety and security of society at large is contingent on what the citizens in our society learn and believe. In order to protect ourselves, we've got to make sure that they learn and believe the right things. Is Rush wrong? Do we go overboard? Maybe we do too much of that. I would argue that we really are afraid to educate our young people, the masses of our young people, beyond that. Because we don't know what's out there, what'll happen. We know what's going to happen as far as the education of the well-to-do is concerned. Because we trust in the fact that these kids have been raised in an environment, in a household, which values education, values hard work, values accomplishment, professionalism, and all the rest of it. We know that these people have been raised in ways which make them safe. But we don't have any guarantees at all about the children of the rest of us. The masses of kids that come from broken homes, that come from homes where the adults abuse them, abuse each other, do drugs, abuse alcohol. Can we risk allowing our youngsters to grow up in that kind of an environment and not be taught the proper rules and the proper behavior and virtue and honesty and truthfulness and the value of work and the value of self-reliance? Can we afford to not do what Rush tells us a republic must do? Do we go overboard with it? Maybe we need to do it, but not quite as much as we do. Maybe we need to find a way to really educate our people in addition to this. What is involved in the thinking and the planning of Betsy DeVos and others who believe that public education as we know it has no place in today's United States of America. That it's a waste of money, a waste of resources, a waste of time. Kids don't take it seriously. They don't take their subjects seriously. They don't take their studies seriously. They see prison as a jail. And they can't wait till they're 16 in order that they can get out. Can we afford to not require our young people to experience that? Can we trust that a home life, that families alone are going to provide the kind of education and training necessary for young people to live as adults in today's world, in today's society? I think all of us need to think about this. But again, I would argue that the major criticisms of our education system today focus on the fact that our education system doesn't educate most people. Really, many people believe, and I'm one, that the principal accomplishment of our education system is to discriminate between the capable and the not capable. But it does more than merely identify who's intelligent and who's not. It also teaches those who are not the most intelligent to accept their lot in life, to not resent those people that are more intelligent than they are. I really think that these are what our goals for public education have come down to. I really believe we moved beyond the world that Benjamin Rush wants to educate young people for. But I don't believe that we've made the adjustments necessary to deal with it in a positive, progressive way. I really believe that we are woefully deficient in the way we educate our young people. I think we tend to assume that the masses of people are the same as the founders looked upon them, as just that, masses of people that must be taught how to behave, what's right and what's wrong, so we'll be safe from them. I would suggest to you that that's the role of public education that's been handed down to us from our past. If you look at our education system from that perspective, we're doing a good job. We're not educating the masses, we're just educating the few. Many people believe that that's the only safe way to do it. I think we've entered a world today when that's no longer sufficient. I think we need to find alternatives. We need to look very seriously at our education system. I go back to the very beginning of today's program in the first hour, when we were talking, when I was making reference to the Common Core. The whole idea of the Common Core standards was to try to agree on an education system, on a system of topics, subjects, that everybody needed to know, and build upon that. The Common Core is based on the principle that what we learn and what we are challenged to learn in the future is determined to a large degree by what we already know. We don't learn in the abstract. We don't learn in a vacuum. We learn well because we're able to connect the things we need to learn with the things we already know. And the result is that we become self-educated. We educate ourselves. This, I would argue, is what lifelong learning is really about. Our education system needs to teach the basics. The basic knowledge that people in a contemporary society need to know. And then from there on, they can educate themselves. We're not doing that. I believe that we're spending too much of our time indoctrinating young people and not educating them. I really believe as a society we're afraid to educate all of our young people. I think the state of West Virginia's behavior with the Common Core is a perfect example of that. I think what it does is bear testimony to the fact that too many adults in our society have not made the commitment to educate all of our children. We're much more comfortable with the idea of just educating some of our children and training the rest. That, I would argue, is Thomas Jefferson's model. That, I would also argue, is Benjamin Rush's model. There's got to be something to this, I would suggest to you. I think we've just about reached the end of our program today. It's, according to my watch, is about 2 minutes before the top of the hour. I want to thank you for tuning into the Virtual Center. I want to thank you for your continued support of Bob Kincaid and Agnes and folks at Head On. I hope that you'll be with us tomorrow. I remind you that tomorrow we begin our program 30 minutes later than today. We begin at 1:30 Eastern Time on Tuesdays. And so we'll try to go right through the entire 90 minutes without a break tomorrow. I hope that you have a wonderful evening. Please be kind to each other, love each other. I think the world needs more of that. Thank you once again for listening. I hope you have a great evening. Thank you.